The subject of this interview is Miss Grace Eleanor Edinboro. Today's date is May 15, 2018. This interview is being conducted at Abraham Lincoln High as a part of the Abraham Lincoln High School Oral History Project. Miss Grace Edinboro, would you please affirm that you have signed the deed of gift authorizing the Abraham Lincoln High School Oral History Project to make this interview available to future researchers?
Yes, I have.
Thank you. Now we will begin with our first question. Can you describe what your life was like growing up?
Normal life. I grew up in San Francisco. Matter of fact, probably about half a mile from here. I think I moved to San Francisco when I was about in first grade, so went through the schools in San Francisco. When I was in when I started fifth grade, they started busing in San Francisco, so I got bused across town for a couple of years, and sort of opened up my experience from what was at that point. This neighborhood was very sort of white and maybe some Asian, and not a lot else. And that the Visitation Valley, where I went to school for a couple of years, was much more multicultural, and it was, not that I'm pro or anti-busing, and it certainly made going to school hard, but it was, I think, accomplished what it should be, because I think people should live among, a multicultural thing. But then I went to Herbert Hoover Junior High back then, middle school, I guess now, and I went to Lowell High School. So it was a normal middle class, upbringing, I guess.
When you were young, did you ever think about joining the military?
I was interested in the military probably from about the 6th grade on, so yeah. Not sure why, I think it's in my blood.
What were your life plans before you joined the military?
I think from once I figured out what the military was, which was maybe junior high and start of high school, I think when I was in 6th grade, I didn't have a clue. I just kind of liked the uniforms and the, what I saw on TV or movies. But I did a little bit more research and sort of learned about it. So I don't think I ever considered any other career. It was what I wanted to do.
Did you have family members in the military that might have influenced you joining?
My father, sorry.
It's okay.
My father was in World War II. He totally didn't fight or anything, but he spent like 4 or 5 years going through North Africa and Sicily and Italy and England and France, and so he was maybe 20, 22 years old, and I think I grew up on little cute stories of how he was on guard duty in the middle of the desert one night, and some camel came out of the nowhere and kind of walked past, and so I grew up on his stories but it wasn't really war stories. He never fired a shot or anything. He was just a support guy. But I think I was influenced by that. But I had nobody else in my family at all had really served in the military.
Were your parents supportive of you joining the military?
Yeah, I think so. My dad more than my mom, but yeah, they supported me in I think whatever I wanted to do. But
that's nice.
I think my dad was very proud. My mom. She said, "Why do you want to be in the Army? The Navy has nicer uniforms." And she was totally not that kind of a person, but I don't think she got. She just said, if we just cancel all wars, we just all agree never to go to war, then we don't need militaries anywhere. And that's not, She was a smarter person than that, too. That's odd.
How was boot camp?
When I got out of high school, I joined the Air Force Reserve, so that's where I went to boot camp. And then I served for 3 years in the Air Force Reserve. I actually got out of there and went into Army ROTC, so I became an Army officer for my active duty and the rest of my career. So boot camp was very, very easy for me. I had been in junior ROTC in high school, and I'd been in Civil Air Patrol, which is kind of like the Boy Scouts or something. You go once a week to a meeting and stuff, and you have weekend activities, and you wear an Air Force uniform, and so it's kind of like being junior ROTC, but not not in a school. And so I had done I knew how to march, I knew how to, salute and do all of the military things. So boot camp was just 6 weeks of somebody trying to teach me things I already knew.
Did the training you received prepare you enough for the war?
I didn't go to war for 30 years, well, maybe not quite that much, but I first got in the military in 1979, and I think I went to war in 2005. So, I mean, there's a lot of training and life learning, in between that. Certainly the training that I had, throughout my career, I think prepared me to go to war. And I think the training, like in our OTC, was good. I didn't, it's not like my war service was mostly behind a computer, sitting at a desk, with an air conditioner over my shoulder. So, it wasn't like I was, fighting in a trench or crawling up a mountain or things like that. So, yeah.
What was the most helpful part of your training, do you think?
So one of the things the military does a lot of is conduct exercises, and it depends on what kind of unit you are. It's war games, I think maybe they used to call it, 50 years ago. But so when you simulate or you put yourself in a situation and you practice doing the things that you would do in a war, I think that's the most useful thing. Even if your job is sitting behind a computer, it's developing and knowing the kind of reports and what you're looking for and how to convey information to the various units under you and that kind of stuff. And so I think everybody benefits by that kind of training.
What did you do in Fort Bragg?
So Fort Bragg was my first duty station. I was on active duty right after I got commissioned as a second lieutenant, and I was there for about 4 years. My first unit, I was in a civil affairs unit, which their mission is to go into a war zone if we're in a war and work with the local government and all the various parts of a local government to help them either set up and start running their country again, or to, mostly it's just set up and make sure that things are running. So you would work with like the water agency and the garbage people and, just the kind of things that help make a city, function. And I was a military police officer, so we would theoretically work with the local police and, make sure that they're able to establish law and order and do the things they're supposed to do. But we didn't go to war or anything at that point. I actually spent about 4 months in Grenada during that, while I was assigned to that unit, and my job was the supply officer, so I kind of managed the logistics for the unit that was down there. But and then about the last year of my time at Fort Bragg, I transferred to a military police company, so I was actually a platoon leader, which is, I was in charge of about 40 military police men and women, I guess. And our job was to train and be able to go someplace and do the military police job. It sounds like law enforcement stuff, but it was really more, especially this was in the 1980s, the focus for military police then was more security operations. So if you picture a huge, like Europe in World War II or something, a battlefield, if you will, you have all the infantry guys out in the front lines doing the fighting and stuff, and in the rear, and farther back, you have more headquarters units and support units, all the the people that are supporting the war that's going on up at the front. And the military police job was to make sure that the rear area was safe. So we did a lot of patrolling and set up like traffic control points at a major intersection, convoy security, those kinds of missions. So that's the kind of thing that we practiced.
What influenced you to join the Air Force?
Civil Air Patrol. My dad was in the Army Air Corps in World War II, but he didn't fly or anything. And I was in Army Junior ROTC at Lowell, and then Civil Air Patrol, as a after-school hobby or whatever. And CAP had a huge impact on me, and most of my friends were in either in Junior ROTC or CAP, and I liked the Air Force, and I probably would have become an Air Force officer, except I didn't really want to fly. So I liked leadership and working with people more, and pretty much figured that the Army was a better place to do that than the Air Force. So.
What fears did you have going into the Iraq War?
I don't even remember, to be honest with you. Anybody going into a war, place where people may be shooting at you or trying to blow you up, I don't know that I was afraid, but, that you hope that kind of thing doesn't happen. But to be honest with you, I had been in the military for the 80s and 90s, about 25, 26 years by the time I went to Iraq, and I was happy to finally actually be able to do something that I've been training for 25 years to do. So I don't know that I was necessarily afraid. I think cautious maybe, but I don't think I was really afraid going to Iraq.
What was it like when you first arrived in Iraq?
Very hot. It was, just sort of like, any completely new place. You're trying to figure out, what's around and what everything is like and how things work, and just trying to figure, mostly, especially when you first arrive, you're on a base. So it's like going into any military base, you're trying to figure out where things are and how you get things done. I think I left the base fairly early on when we were still orienting ourselves, and went out into Baghdad and visited a bunch of police stations, because our job was to work with the Iraqi police to help train them to be better police, I guess. It was just a very different place. It was very different from the police are different in Iraq, but also just the architecture's interesting. Just going to a city in a country that's so different from our own, I think. So I was always just looking around, trying to kind of soak in as much as I could.
When you first joined the military, did you think you'd come out a colonel?
No, not at all. I think I would have been very happy to be a lieutenant colonel, which is kind of a lot of, if you're successful, that's a good rank to achieve. But as you I guess. How do I want to put it? I think as you progress in any field, whether it's even as a student at school, but certainly like in the military or a business of some kind, as you don't really notice as you work your way up and you learn new things and stuff. You look around you and you compare yourself to how other people are doing, and it's like, well, hi, I could be as good as him, So it just sort of happens. But no, I never thought I would be a colonel when I retired.
What was your role during the time you were in Iraq?
The first, so I spent 2 years in Iraq. My first tour was from basically, I think, October of 2005 to September 2006, and I was the executive officer for a military police brigade. And basically what that means is the brigade is a level of headquarters that oversees a whole bunch of military policemen. So we probably had 25, 30 units under us that with 3,500 military police spread all throughout Iraq. And our job was to manage that and make sure that, they were doing the missions that we were assigned, and that we had a plan to do the job that we were supposed to do, which was pretty much, like I said, training Iraqi police. So I was the executive officer in the brigade headquarters, and so my job was to supervise the brigade staff. So a military staff consists of really like a personnel admin person, intelligence, operations, logistics, and public affairs, and then maybe finance or resources kind of thing. And so they all worked for me, and we worked together to make sure that, the personnel person was supporting the personnel mission, throughout the brigade. The intel guys were doing the intel stuff and gathering the information that from within the intelligence community and passing that both up the chain and down out to the troops on the ground that needed it. The operations guys were assigning missions and tasking, things. So basically they worked for me, and I just made sure that they had the resources they needed to do the job. So.
What about your second tour?
My second tour was 2009 to 2010, and I was the deputy commander of the same unit. This was a National Guard unit out of Fairfield, actually. So when we first got there, our job was the same. It was still training Iraqi police. A lot of things were different, 3 or 4 years after, later, but that was still the job. My job very quickly became, because as a deputy commander, I was put in charge of detention operations, which is basically, sort of like prisoner stuff. So there was another MP brigade there at the time, and they were getting ready to leave. And we were downsizing troops in Iraq at that point. So the brigade that was doing the detention mission was the last brigade that was assigned to be in the country doing that mission. And unfortunately, they weren't going to be finished by the time they left. So our brigade took over the mission, and we stood up sort of a headquarters to continue doing detention operations and making sure that was going on, but also to plan and execute how we would stop doing detention operations, basically. So the last about 6 months of my tour was we had one prison would be the civilian detention, facility would be what the Army would call it, but it, it was a prison with like all the people that had been detained for being terrorists or things like that. So we had about 3,000 prisoners, and we had to make sure that they were, secured and cared for and everything within that the prison was running well. And we had to execute plans to turn all of that over to the Iraqi government so that they could continue running the prison and we could leave. So that was pretty much my job. To be honest with you, the prison was running just fine, and I don't know much about running prisons. Mm-hmm. So other than, getting reports and making sure that it continued to run fine, I let them sort of run the prison that they'd been running before I got there. And my job really focused more on, okay, we have to build a road from here to here so that the Iraqis can get into their prison once we're gone. Okay, we have to, build this facility. We ended up taking a military post where the prison was, which was on a U.S. base, and putting a wall down the middle of it, and the Iraqi prison was on the outside of the wall, and the rest of the U.S. base was on the inside of the wall. Before I started, the wall was over, was over here, and the Iraqi prison was on the inside of the base. So we just had to sort of build a wall through the prison, make sure they had generators, make sure they had waters, make sure they had a main gate so that they could enter, vehicles could enter the prison, make sure that there was a road that they could get to the prison from outside of the base. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of building and engineering things. It was fascinating. It was fun, actually. But.
What was the most important event that happened to you during your time in Iraq?
Well, one of the more significant times was we almost got blown up in a convoy I was in, but I wasn't hurt. So that was certainly an exciting time. Probably the most significant actual thing that happened was turning over the prison to the Iraqi. I don't remember what they were even called now, but the Iraqi prison service or whatever they were. But so, I mean, there was a lot of planning, a lot of, all of the splitting up that base into two bases and making sure they were able to, they had the training and the resources and stuff to run their prison, and actually turning over, the ownership of the prison to the Iraqi government. That was probably the most significant thing I did.
Why did you guys decide to do that, or what was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I mean, our government had declared that we would be pretty much out of Iraq, not that it happened, but that we would be out of Iraq by September of 2010. We would be down to 10,000 soldiers or less. And a couple of years earlier, there was like 150,000 soldiers. I mean, there was a lot of, So that basically meant all of the missions that we were doing, somebody within the U.S. military, talking with the Iraqi government, had to say, okay, we're only going to do this, this, and this. Out of 100 things that we're doing now, we're only going to do these few things. And so over a couple of year period, we actually, from my little perspective, we actually turned over 3 prisons. At one point, there was a huge prison in southern Iraq that held most of the terrorists that we held. There was the prison that I ended up being in charge of, and then there was another prison just north of Baghdad. So we got rid of the big one in December of 2009. We got rid of the prison north of Baghdad in, I think, February of 2010. And so as we did that, we closed down the prison, or we turned it over to the Iraqi justice system, and they started essentially running the prison. To do that, it had to be something that they could run without our, without being on the middle of our base, because they couldn't just come on our base, like they had been. So it was.
You mentioned almost getting blown up. What happened?
It was actually Valentine's Day in 2006. And I was in a convoy that was going from a base in Iraq is called a FOB, a forward operating base. So one FOB to another. We had actually this was a base where one of our subordinate units was stationed. It was on the other side of Baghdad, and we had been visiting them because there was a memorial service for a couple of soldiers that had been killed. We were going back home to our base, and a couple of IEDs, explosive device, bombs, basically. They set them off on our convoy and hit the first vehicle. I was in the third vehicle of the convoy, and it hit the first and the second vehicles. So, yeah. But I think one guy had like a concussion, and the vehicles were pretty secure. Certain kinds of bombs would definitely kill you, but the kind that wasn't as bad, I guess. So, but it wakes you up.
What is your opinion on the surge? Do you think it was effective, sending more troops over?
That I might have to think longer at than we have. I know when they briefed us, because we left in September, I guess September of 2006, and they had. They were coming up with the plan for the surge as, when we were leaving. And they briefed us, and we thought they were crazy. I think it was effective in a lot of places, short term. And a lot of the things that we did over there were effective short term. even just training the Iraqi police. Well, yeah, sure, you get 20 Iraqi police in a training situation and you train them, that's fine. But 2 years later, are they doing are they using that training? No, they're not. So I think a lot of the things that we did over there, whether they worked at the time or not, didn't have any kind of long-term positive effects. And if you look at Iraq today, most of the things that we tried to do had no long-term effect at all, at least in my opinion.
What are your thoughts on the Abu Ghraib incident?
It was a horrible thing, and especially to see fellow military policemen involved in a situation like that was very sad. I actually had soldiers. I had, at the time that Abu Ghraib happened, I was here. I was a battalion commander, which meant I was a commander of a battalion headquarters, and I had 4 companies under my battalion, okay? A company is under a battalion. They took, at the beginning of the war, they mobilized all 4 of my companies and sent them to Iraq. This was at the beginning of the war in 2003. But they didn't need my battalion headquarters, so we were here at home. And at the time, 2 of my companies were in Abu Ghraib when that happened. Luckily, they weren't in that part of the prison doing that job, but they easily could have been. They were undermanned by the time they got that mission. They weren't very well supervised, and I think it speaks a lot to sort of if you have a lenient command climate where you're not checking on what your subordinates are doing, nobody's wandering around, if you're on the night shift in whatever that wing of the prison was, and you've never seen a sergeant come through at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're pretty sure that there aren't any sergeants going to come through at 3 o'clock in the morning. So you're more likely to do things that you're not supposed to do because you're probably not going to get caught. And I think that was true all the way up the chain of command, that the leaders weren't checking on their people, weren't making sure they were doing the jobs the way they should have been doing the jobs. The way that prison ran was the leadership of the unit wasn't involved in the jobs that their soldiers were doing. So we had like platoon leaders who had, say, 25 soldiers that fell under them. The soldiers were assigned to different shifts at the prison, and they weren't necessarily working for their lieutenant when they were on the job doing their shift work. So they might be guarding prisoners or doing whatever, and their lieutenants weren't allowed to even go in and check on them. And I think with that breakdown in the chain of command was one of the big things that set that up to happen. And it was, I think, a very dark day in the history of the military police corps, and certainly in the United States Army and of the United States itself. It's, we like to think that we're better than that. We like to think that we don't let things like that happen, but it's human nature, and, the military has systems, and as do even civilian companies and stuff, or if you're running a prison in America or any other place, and if you let those systems break down, then bad things can happen, and they sure did there.
How do you feel the U.S. reacted after 9/11 when Bush sent troops immediately to Afghanistan to find bin Laden?
Well, you guys probably weren't even born, were you? Our country was attacked, and I mean, for literally, 3,000 people were killed, and I think the country really, and the world, in most cases, the world came together and reacted, and I think it was a good reaction. Unfortunately, you know, they didn't necessarily, I don't know, I think a lot of we could have been more successful in Afghanistan if we had kept focus on, you know, Al-Qaeda and the people that attacked us on 9/11. The whole venture into Iraq diluted the ability to still do what we needed to do in Afghanistan. But I think the initial reaction was a good reaction, both of the country by coming together and supporting ourselves, and the world by coming together, you know, and being outraged that somebody would do something like that. And the military's initial actions in Afghanistan were successful and pretty positive. They just didn't really follow up as well as they might have, and then they didn't have the resources to maintain the focus and get. I don't know that we could have ever accomplished much in Afghanistan, but I think we lost the initiative to do it, you know. But I think the initial response was good.
How were you treated by others when you took over the detention operations?
What do you mean by others?
Like the Iraqi police. Like how was your interaction with them?
Well, I took over a job that lots of other people had done before I was there. So for the most part, I was treated just like any of my predecessors. I was probably not as well trained as some of my predecessors, except maybe the ones that were at Abu Ghraib, because my unit's mission had not been initially to do detention operations, so we did a little bit of training on that, but most units that, you know, the unit that I took over from had focused completely on detention operations training before they went. So I think they were more prepared to do detention operations. Luckily, my job wasn't really detention operations as much as it was just getting ready for the transition to Iraqi control. But I think as a woman, for the most part, we were treated with respect by the Iraqis, by, you know, the leaders that we dealt with. There were occasionally jerks that you'd come across that maybe didn't like working with women, but I think that's probably true most places that you go, and at all levels. But most of the Iraqi, you know, the high-level Iraqis and stuff that I worked with were pretty, you know, they're a pretty modern culture, of fairly Western-oriented culture for, you know, I mean, it's not like you're dealing with a tribal sheikh in Afghanistan or something. You know, this is somebody who, you know, lived in Baghdad in a cosmopolitan city that, you know, was, you know, very familiar with Western, you know, ways and civilization and stuff. So I think overall, I was treated well and was respected as much as you know, I respected them.
Did being a female in the military affect the way society saw you?
I'm not sure how society saw me. Our society or their society or?
Both. Either.
I'm not sure. I don't know. What's your opinion of, you know, of females in the military as somebody that's in society? Don't know. Yeah, it's our military is pretty equal opportunity based. You know, I think how well you do is based more on your performance, not, you know, your gender or your race or you know, really where you come from or anything. That's how we kind of expect to operate. And you know, I'm not sure that I'm not sure I could even tell you what, like American society thinks about that. I think generally there's a fairly high opinion of the American military, and because we are, the first ones to really embrace some social areas, whether it's integrating the military or bringing women into, positions of more power. And I think the integrity, we emphasize a lot of honor and integrity and stuff. And I think for the most part, the American people kind of look at the military as generally people that do a good job at what we're supposed to do. So.
What did you do during your leave from the military, like between both your tours?
I actually worked for the National Guard. That was my civilian job, and basically I just I think I came back and I worked in operations up at our state headquarters or something. So just went back to my normal job.
What was a typical day like during your time in Iraq?
I usually started with physical training. I'd get up at like 6 or 5:30 or 6 and work out, and go to work till noon and have lunch. The mess halls over there were amazing. Kellogg, Brown and Root did a great job. You had to work out to not gain weight. I think we worked about a 12 or 14-hour day usually. Usually I was like, on a normal day for me, I was in the office, getting reports and doing things on the computer and talking with the people that worked for me and, making sure things were going well. There were times where I would leave the base and, either go to another place in Baghdad or fly to another base in other parts of the country and stuff. But that probably wasn't more than a couple times a month. So usually I'd work until, sometime after dinner, about 7 or 8, and then just go back to my quarters and sleep.
Tell us about some of the people that you met and served with or trained.
I had some great friends, especially deployed in Iraq. When you're all living on a base in one place and you can't really go anywhere, you get to be pretty good friends with some people. One of my best friends is actually in Afghanistan right now. He's on his, I think, 4th tour, but his name is Peter Cross, and I worked with him off and on in the National Guard, both before and after we went to Iraq in 2005. Keith Tresh was my battle buddy, which is basically, you never really do anything alone in a combat zone. You always have a buddy to make sure that you are sort of protecting each other. Even on a base, you're not supposed to go places alone. And Keith was our communications guy, and he was great at making communications work, whether it was radios or our computer system and stuff. And he ended up leaving the Guard and working communications, I think, at a county down in the LA area someplace. Leona Wheeler was our operations sergeant major. She had been a long-time non-commissioned officer, an NCO, a sergeant in the Guard. She worked full-time for the Guard, so usually her job was just managing, running operations at a headquarters level. And she was not a military police soldier. She was actually, I'm not sure what her I think she came up through the logistics, so like supply sergeant, things like that. And when our unit got selected to go to war, she actually went off to MP school as a very high-ranking NCO. She went through the 6 weeks of school that you have to do to get qualified as an MP. And I was very impressed by her willingness to do that. You know, that's a school that usually privates go through, not sergeants major. But she was very proud to be in the unit and wanted to do a good job, and she did when we were over there. So,
What was your interaction with Iraqi civilians like?
almost none, and which I think is a shame, because I think if you don't meet people and talk to people and get to know them, then you're not going to really understand them. We were on our little base in the middle of their city, and and pretty much there weren't even, they would bring in, we called them TCNs, third country nationals. So there would be like people from Pakistan working in the mess halls or in the shopette or places like that. People from the Philippines, from Uganda, from Pakistan. They would hire, people that these contractors would hire at pretty crappy wages. Did most of the support roles on the base. And so they didn't hire locals to do that. And when you were out in on the street or something, you were all in all of your battle rattle stuff and your helmet and had your your M4 weapon. It's not like some little kid's going to come up and say, "Hey, can I have a candy bar?" kind of thing. It's I think we're a lot less approachable than maybe the soldiers that you see in movies or newsreels from World War II, that or even Vietnam. I mean, you could walk up to a soldier and say something, and that there was a space. If you were out on a street, you didn't let anybody within the bubble of your group of people. So I don't think there was hardly any interaction with local people. Our interaction with Iraqis were people that worked for the government, whether it was the police or the prison guards or government officials, things like that. But, didn't get to talk to people on the street at all. And I think that's a shame.
Knowing what you know now, do you think the U.S. mission in Iraq was successful?
No, I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, I guess you have to define the mission, and I'm not sure I could say how our government did that. Bringing democracy to Iraq, to a certain extent, we were successful. They had elections that we support, that we made sure were valid elections, But I think we were naive to believe that we could just go into a place and declare democracy and help them achieve democracy and expect that they would then love us because, we're the wonderful people that brought them democracy. Yeah. They still have their inner core beliefs, and I just heard on the radio today that I guess they're in an election season in Iraq. I hadn't been paying attention. The political party that's run by al-Sadr, who was sort of one of the major terrorists when I was there, is apparently winning in the elections. And even before that, even when the guy who we supported won, the Iraqi government, the Shiite Iraqi government, is very influenced by Iran and the Iranian government. And so I think that what the U.S. government thought they would get out of invading Iraq and overthrowing Saddam Hussein was hopefully a democratically elected, Western-oriented government that loved the United States. Something like Japan after World War II or Germany after World War II, and that wasn't the case and isn't the case now. So, and I think most of the stuff that we did while we were there has, as soon as we left, pretty much fell apart. So.
How did the events of the war change your life or perspective?
I'm not sure. I would say that it certainly, I talked about being proud and wanting to serve, wanting to deploy after 20, 25 years of basically just training. Having the opportunity to actually do what I'd been training to do was, I think, a really good way to end my military career. And I was really happy to be able to do it. It was hard being away from my husband. Luckily, we didn't have kids, but it was hard being away from my husband for those 2 years. And in a lot of ways, he needed me, and I wasn't there. So that was certainly a negative thing about deploying. But overall, it was a I don't know about a life-changing, but it was a good way to actually accomplish something, I think, out of my military career. You can spend 20 years in the military and really never do anything. So at least I did something. So I was happy about that.
What important life lessons do you think you learned?
Boy. I think at a national level, that we're not as powerful as we used to think that we were, and we can't just want something to happen, someplace else in the world and go and make it happen. So I think that I learn, I learn certainly a lot about what goes on in the Middle East and the politics and the religions, and the interaction of different people in the Middle East. I'm not sure it really affected my own personal life much at all, really. I mean, it was just sort of something I did. It was part of my career. Nothing really changed in my life from my deployments to Iraq.
How have you been able to move past the war and your life in the military?
So I guess I'm one of the lucky ones. I didn't, have PTSD or any kind of major, traumatic reactions to any of the things that I did. I have friends who have gone through that, even if it wasn't from a combat kind of thing, even just some people's reaction to being deployed. It broke up marriages. It had really significant negative effects on them. And I had close friends that went through some personal trauma, but I didn't. So it was. I kind of look back. It's faded into my mind a lot. It's not something I really think about. And even my military career, because I'm retired 3 years ago now, and I'm very proud to have done it. I'm happy I did it. It was the career that I wanted. It was really what I wanted to do, but I'm glad that it's done, and I don't really think about it a lot. I just get on with my life today.
Did you get any benefits from being in the military?
They pay well. you get to see the world. You don't necessarily get to see the nicer parts of the world. But I think you get to meet and work with some great people, and maybe be involved in some significant things that happen. As far as monetary things, like the GI Bill and stuff, I haven't really taken advantage of that, and haven't gone to the VA and asked them for money or health care or anything. Really, for me, it was more being part of something, being part of a team of people. I still have friends that I served with back then that I keep in touch with, and and it was what I wanted to do. It was kind of like I said, it was in my blood, just always what I wanted to do, and that's what I did.
Are you part of any veterans organizations or anything?
I'm technically a member of something called the Scottish American Military Society, which is basically if you're a veteran and if you have Scottish ancestry. My Scottish ancestry is a little bit questionable. It's more my husband's side. But I don't really do much with them. I do work with cadets, so I know Colonel Ishikata, your junior ROTC instructor here at Lincoln, is a very old friend of mine, and I still work with the Civil Air Patrol, and I work with an organization called the California Cadet Corps. That's kind of like junior ROTC, but it's just funded by the state, and it's in schools mostly in Southern California, and we aim at trying to teach leadership and using a military model to develop better citizens and teach leadership skills that hopefully our cadets can use whenever they go out and become adults and try to do something with their lives. So I enjoy that. I enjoy working in sort of a military environment without the whole combat thing. So.
Is there anything else that you would like to talk about that we haven't covered?
I don't think so. Sorry.
Can we talk about some of these photos?
Sure.
What was this?
That I was in what's called an MRAP, and I don't know what the acronym stands for. It's a big truck. When we started having our Humvees blown up, then they invented MRAPs, so it had more armor protection and stuff. So this is it's a big truck with about 8 seats in the back of it, and and a turret up on top. And I think that was in Mosul, where we were going out to visit some police stations. So I've actually been to Mosul.
Who are you with?
Her name was Jenna Stewart, and that's actually an MRAP that we're standing in front of. That was taken on the day that we went to the huge graduation ceremony of the Baghdad Police College. And so it was this huge parade that they did with all kinds of, I guess the academy had graduated a whole, hundreds of new police officers, and they did a big parade, and it was in an Iraqi base in Baghdad.
Sorry, the camera died.
You guys can continue.
No worries.
Pony Soldier wants the recording.
Yeah.
What was
That was at the Baghdad Police College graduation afterwards, just with a couple of Iraqi police. What they had was they had all the different kinds of police that the Iraqi police have. So, so the units marched in the parade in different uniforms and with different equipment and stuff. And that was just a couple of Iraqi policemen that we took our pictures with. My rats. So we're living in that was actually in like 2006. our headquarters was in a mansion. That's probably the best thing. You know, it was the base we were on had been like a resort base for really rich Iraqis and stuff. And so we took over all the buildings, and there were like sandbags piled in front of, around the windows and stuff to protect it because they would fire mortars on the base a lot. And so you had all of these piles of sandbags, and unfortunately rats lived in them. So in the office where we worked, I put out a trap, and I actually caught this one because I had never seen a rat in my life before, okay? I didn't grow up with rats. So I could tell there was a rat that was coming at night, when we weren't in the office. So I set it. We first tried the sticky trap, and they laughed at it. And so we got these big rat traps and put it out. They really like chocolate kisses, I'm here to tell you. They wouldn't do cheese, they wouldn't do peanut butter, but Hershey's Kisses, they liked them. And so I caught the rat, and he was about like this big. So something happened, and so I got a little picture of a rat off the internet and put it up on the wall. And then I caught a rat someplace else. So this was rat number 6. When I hit 5, they called me an ace, and so I stopped after 6. I didn't catch any more rats. 6 I wasn't really gunning for, but he was in our office, so felt he had to go. So you have fun when you're.
Where was this?
That was a sign that my guys made up for when I commanded the detention facility. So that was a sign right outside our headquarters that that's who we were, the 49th Military Brigade TAC CP, so Tactical Command Post. So that was our patch that we wore, and it was just a really cool sign.
Where was it?
That's in Baghdad. The Cross Sabers I think they've torn it down now, but a big monument that Saddam Hussein built, and they would have huge parades there and stuff. And so it was a pretty common tourist attraction for American military people to get your picture taken in front of the Cross Sabers. So I did it too.
And this?
That was in one of the palaces that was on our base, where our higher headquarters was. I have no idea what it actually. It was obviously a chair, the rumor was it was like Saddam Hussein's throne. It was not, clearly, but it was a big fancy chair that was still in the palace. It was a beautiful building. And it was a sort of a tourist thing that all the visiting military would come in and get your picture taken at the chair, or whatever it's called. And that's just our unit. That was in 2009. They sent us to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and there were about 100 people in our unit. That was a brigade headquarters, and that was, I think, the day that they declared that we were ready to ship out, and we had a little ceremony and had our picture taken in front of whatever that statue is. So that was my unit in 09-10.
And who are you with in this photo?
That's my buddy Keith, my battle buddy. And that was, if you look behind, in between us, that's actually the right hand of the cross sabers. You can see the hand and the sword going up in the air. So that was the same day as the other picture, but we were downtown and just taking pictures and stuff. It's interesting, around where the hand is was like netting, and they had Iranian helmets that like had bullet holes and stuff. They gathered them off the battlefield during the Iran-Iraq War, and they had, so like the whole base of the statue was like Iranian helmets that from the Iran-Iraq War. That's what they put there. It was kind of gruesome, actually. At least it wasn't skulls,
And this last photo?
That was taken in Kuwait when we were getting ready. We were waiting for the flight to go to Baghdad the first time I went. So it was the guy on the left was our chaplain, and the lady in the middle was our operations sergeant major, and I'm sitting on the right. I was actually on the left, and that would have been in like September of 2009, on our way to Iraq.
Can you clarify what a chaplain is?
A chaplain is like a religious guy. It's every headquarters unit has a chaplain and a chaplain's assistant that helps minister to the religious needs of the soldiers in the unit and deal with all religious stuff, plus counseling and things like that.
That's all the questions that we have. Thank you so much for
My pleasure.
coming.